CBSE Biology Class 10 Chapter 16 Management of Natural Resources Part 2A. Let us learn the biology chapters through questions and answers which most of the students prefer. Note that PG here is for page, PR for paragraph in your textbook. Questions are given in yellow color, answers are in white color. What is biodiversity and why it is important? Biodiversity means the range of all different life forms on earth, such as bacteria, fungi, ferns, flowering plants, nematodes, insects, birds, reptiles, and so on. All the diverse living beings are collectively called biodiversity. One of the main aims of conservation is to try and preserve the biodiversity we have inherited. Experiments and field studies suggest that a loss of biodiversity may lead to a loss of ecological stability. Why we should carefully think of using forest produce. We all use various forest produce, but our dependency on forest resources varies. Some of us have access to alternatives, some do not. When we consider the conservation of forests, we need to look at the stakeholders who are people who live in or around forests, are dependent on forest produce for their life. 2. Forest department of the government, which owns the land and controls the resources. Number 3. The industrialists who use various forest produce. Number 4. The wildlife and nature enthusiasts who want to conserve nature in its pristine form. How the local people are dependent on forest produce. The local people need large quantities of firewood, small timber, and thatch. Bamboo is used to make slats for huts and baskets for collecting and storing food materials. Implements for agriculture, fishing, and hunting are largely made of wood. Also, forests are sites for fishing and hunting, in addition to people gathering fruits, nuts, and medicines from the forest. Their cattle also graze in forest areas or feed on other fodder which is collected from forests. Do you think the use of forest resources by local people would lead to the exhaustion of these resources? We should not forget that before the British came and took over most of our forest areas, people had been living in these forests for centuries. They had developed practices to ensure that the resources were used in a sustainable manner. How did British administration take control of our forest and its resources? After the British took control of the forests, which they exploited ruthlessly for their own purposes, the local people who were there for centuries were forced to depend on much smaller areas, and forest resources started becoming overexploited to some extent. How did the administration of independent India take control of our forest and its resources? The Forest Department of independent India took over from the British, but local knowledge and local needs continued to be ignored in the management practices. Thus, vast tracts of forests have been converted to monocultures of trees such as pine, teak, or eucalyptus. In order to plant these trees, huge areas are first cleared of all vegetation. This destroys a large amount of biodiversity in the area. How do the monoculture plantations affect the people of India? The varied needs of the local people, such as leaves for fodder, herbs for medicines, fruits and nuts for food, can no longer be met for such monoculture forests. Such plantations are useful for the industries to access specific products and are an important source of revenue for the forest department. How many industries are based on forest produce? A short count reveals the following, such as timber, paper, lac and sports equipment, and there are some more. How industries and the local people consider the forest. Industries would consider the forest as merely a source of raw material for their forest factories, and huge interest groups lobby the government for access to these raw materials at artificially low rates. Since these industries have a greater reach than the local people, they are not interested in the sustainability of the forest in one particular area, whereas the life of local people is dependent on forest produce. Thus, they consider the sustainability in the first place for the future generations. End of this part. Dear students, share your doubts and questions to this email, the mail given ID given here. The question answers of this chapter will be continued in the next video.